Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Unfollowing Mum. Today I have a wonderful guest with me that I am so excited that she's given me some of her time to be on the podcast to talk to us about her experiences and about breaking the cycle of generational trauma and parenting really when you haven't got that positive role model there. So before I go any further, let me introduce Abbey Williams. Abbey, hi. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be sitting with you and having this conversation, Harriet.
I've been a follower of yours for a while now, and I
Yeah.
also follow the other ladies that you work on the
Mm.
estrangement project with, which
Yep.
really caught my eye because I just feel like there is so little out there discussed about estrangement, about opening up about toxic family dynamics. And in my experience, when we don't talk about these things, we kind of wrap them in a shroud of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it so difficult for people to heal from that. It makes it feel like you are alone. So that was where Unfollowing Mum came from.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's maybe quite similar to your own experience. Can you tell us a bit about
Yes.
your own journey?
Yeah. So, like my journey to kind of like my platform
Mm-hmm.
on social media and my podcast, You the Mother, I started the podcast 4 years ago. And it really came from a place of loneliness. So I started my motherhood journey when I was 21 years old. I was a young single mom, and my journey into motherhood, that was now almost 13 years ago. So back then there wasn't Facebook mom groups, there wasn't TikTok at all. There was Instagram, but there wasn't like all the parenting gurus that are on Instagram now, and like the platforms that are today weren't there. So I had no online places to plug into, and my peers weren't having children either. And so I just knew, like, from this place of like kind of loneliness in my young motherhood, that I wanted some kind of community and that this was going to be a passion for me. So I went on, I got my education, I got my bachelor's in psychology, my master's in social work. And once I became a therapist, it kind of came full circle. I developed this online platform for moms to kind of come and hang and talk about the highs and lows of motherhood and just make it not so lonely, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 years ago, I went no contact with my mother, and a lot of stuff was going on with me personally, right? I got into therapy, I did some really hard, heavy work. And about a year and a half ago, I think I started speaking about it on my
Yeah.
platform. And again, it was a very like similar situation as like young motherhood for me, where I wasn't seeing any conversations about this online. My friends close to me had similar situations. So again, it was just like this very lonely situation where you just feel like I'm the only one going through this. There is a lot of shame associated. You're going to hear a lot of things from society, your family, your
Oh, yeah.
friends, of, but she's your mother. She's done so
Ugh.
much for you. You should just forgive her. You guys should just work it out, or just like,
Mm.
maybe just see her at Christmas, or what's the big deal.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of these comments that bring around a lot of shame with it, right?
Mm.
So kind of going through that, being on my own healing journey, and I'm just like, I need community again. But I got to a place where I found like some of my own healing, and I was kind of able to bring about some of that on my platform. And so I started talking about it more. And every time I would talk about it, those posts would do so well. And I'm like,
Yes.
well,
Oh, I
right?
know
Like the
exactly what you mean.
engagement, the
Mm.
engagement is really good. And that was like bittersweet for me, right? That
Yeah.
like these posts are really hitting and resonating with a lot of people. And I
Mm.
love that people have a place to land, that there is, that validation, I see you kind of place on the internet. And it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking that there's so many of us, and I don't wish it on anybody, right?
Mm.
So I continued talking about it. I continued making space for those people, normalizing, kind of redirecting some of the perspective around estrangement. And in doing so, I found Maggie over with Parenting with Perspectacles. She's renamed to Maggie with Perspectacles. Dr. Michelle Deering and Michaela Tyson. And we created the Estrangement Project together. And it has been crazy just how
Yeah.
many people have like resonated with that project. But yeah, I just think that community is one of the most important pieces in your healing journey. Like go
Yeah.
get all the therapy and all the help and do all
Yeah.
the things for you, right? But that community piece is so powerful.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, not just as someone who has personal lived experience with
Mhm.
estrangement, but also as a
Mhm.
therapist yourself,
Right, right.
because I get a lot of, and I've even spoken to somebody about this morning, of this.
Mm.
If you are talking about it, it's because you're still in that trauma. You need to let it go. You need to move
Mhm.
beyond it. And it's what keeps abusers able to abuse. It's what
Yeah.
keeps us in that toxic cycle, because when we don't have that community, I think we're quite, and I've said this before, I think on the podcast, I think we're quite self-centered beings, in that we look and
Yeah.
we're like, well, I can't see anyone else going through it, so it must just be me. And that's
Right,
never just you.
right.
And that community for me, as heartbreaking as it has been to see so many people relate to my content around estrangement, to see
Mm.
so many people messaging me, people that I have spoken to for years,
Mm.
messaging me privately to say, look, I don't feel like I can say this publicly, but
Yeah.
I've got this experience and I can't tell you how much you talking about it is helping me. It's been huge and it's been incredibly
I've gotten those
cathartic for
same,
me.
like,
Yeah.
I've gotten those same messages. Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear, not just from somebody who has been through a similar experience in that they've cut those ties with that one person that's meant to be the closest for you,
Mhm.
but equally that they've found that healing in community. And to hear you say it as a therapist as well, I think is really impactful, because so often, as somebody who has experienced abuse, be it emotional, whatever, you are told that in order for you to be over it, you need to stop talking about it. And that's just not the reality at all.
No, no. And I think like community for me and being able to talk about it and name it has saved my life.
Absolutely. And I can relate to that completely. When my estrangement with my mum first happened, and it's funny because I'd said the similar to Michaela I spoke to on the podcast
Yeah.
a few days ago. And I'd said similar to her that I was about 3 years in myself to complete no contact. And it seems to be there is this phase where you don't talk to anybody about it. I don't know if you experienced the same.
It's
I
just like
just,
such deep grief, I
yeah.
think, that like I definitely couldn't have talked about it on my social media platform at that
Mm-hmm.
time, right? Without being just like trauma dumping,
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I did have to go through some grief, really hard stuff behind the scenes
Yeah.
to get to a place where I can talk about it, so that those people who are in that really hard spot have a place to plug into.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that like you do have to kind of get through that
Grief.
first like shock, it is like walking through a fire, that first initial like, okay, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
It takes strength, it takes courage. And for me, like those words are so weird, because
Yes.
like at the moments that I am like the strongest and the bravest, I feel the weakest, right?
Yes.
You are
Yeah.
just like knocked out. And that beginning stage for me was so brutal. Just so much grief, so much just like I can't get out of bed, depression, and just like really having to go through some really, really hard stuff with my therapist, my partner, and just really get through. I think like that is like survival mode in the beginning. And
Yeah,
then
I
you kind
think
of,
so.
and then you get to a place where you are healing and you are on a journey of like finding, who the heck am I? Because I think
Yes.
like we've probably been on this journey for a long time. When you come from these dysfunctional family systems, you've been like programmed to be self-abandoning. And I think as
Mm-hmm.
women, like we go through that across the board anyway.
Yeah.
When you come from some of these different family systems where there's maybe addiction, maybe there's, abuse, just some of these like toxic behaviors, you do develop some coping skills, some survival skills, people pleasing, perfectionism, overworking, maybe you're stuffing emotions in order to survive, right? That's how you survive in this dynamic with this family system, with your mother, whoever is the person. Now that you're deciding, okay, these things aren't working for me. This relationship isn't working for me. This isn't healthy for me. I can't keep living like this. And I have to make this impossible decision of going no contact with my mother, like you said, the most important person that's supposed to be in your life, now who the heck am I? Right. I think like you really go through this identity crisis because you've never arrived at this full version of you. And you're finally making this choice of, I'm choosing me. And that's probably the first choice of yours that you'll make of, all right, now I'm going to start choosing me. I'm not abandoning myself anymore to keep the peace within this family system that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And so, you make that really first, initial choice is so hard. And I think like it, for me, looked a lot like depression, where I was just like down, and then choosing, okay, now I'm going to start making steps forward to love myself, to heal myself, to show up and figure out who the heck Abby is, what do I want the rest of my life to look like? How am I going to be a better mother? How am I going to be a better wife? How am I going to be a better friend? How am I going to show up in all these relationships differently from here on out? Because now I am a different person. And I think like on the other side of all of that, I am so much more intentional in who I surround myself with. And it is so beautiful because I have these people that show up for me. I show up for them. And it is these genuine relationships now, where before, I wasn't showing up for people like that, and people weren't showing up for me like that. And so on the other side, there are these beautiful relationships that will come. But it's really hard in the beginning when you're like, you have no idea. You have no idea what the rest of your life is going to look like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once you start setting those boundaries and you start being intentional with yourself and you start being a better you, allowing yourself to be the you that you actually know you are, but that you're suppressing to try and please somebody else, you can't stop. And I know that having gone through this experience, it's made such a huge difference to my life, my marriage, my work, everything, to how I am as a mother and to how I communicate with things. I think it's so difficult. Certainly in my experience, I will never know, but I look back at my relationship with my mum and I often think it's very textbook covert narcissist. And a lot of enmeshment there. And I look back and I think, I never actually really had a chance to step into my own and explore who I am, which I'm now able to do. And it sounds like such an insane thing to be doing in your 30s, but
I know.
It's something that so many of us who've been through this period are now doing. But that grief, just to touch on that, because I think quite often one of the misconceptions is that if you've chosen to cut ties, you're quite flippant about it. Oh, you've made your decision. I don't want you in my life. And that's it. I'm done. It's nothing like that at all. And when I was younger, I would have definitely had the perception that if somebody could cut someone out of their life, just go, that's it. You're not going to be a part of my life anymore. Well, then they've made their decision, so they must be okay with it. And it's for the other party to deal with. And I think that idea is so common when you think about estrangement.
So not true.
And it's the total opposite. If anything, it's almost like this bereavement period where you grieve the loss of what that relationship should have been, what it could have looked like, what it would have looked like if they'd have been willing to be accountable and they'd have been willing to meet you somewhere. Because that's often what I find when I speak to people, is that it's that lack of accountability and that lack of willingness to change, to heal themselves and meet someone halfway. You're not asking for perfection. You're asking for being met. And if we can't meet each other, that's when the relationship breaks down and is beyond repair. But there is this kind of real bereavement period. And even if you try to talk about it, it's often a case of, well, you chose it, so you've only got yourself to blame.
No, I love that, like, you're talking about this, Harriet. And I think like the perspective shift there is like the person that's going no contact, this is their last resort. There's been so many attempts to keep this relationship. That's not the first thing that people go to, is like, oh, I'm just cutting people off. That is not the first thing that people that are in this journey are doing, right? And so I think like that's the perspective shift that like needs to happen with society, maybe your family. I don't know, people who aren't walking in it, because, you know, what you haven't seen is there's been years of trying to set boundaries, trying to have hard conversations, trying to say, hey, mom, when you talk to me like this, it makes me feel like this. And you're just not seen, you're not heard, you're not validated. You're often gaslit. That didn't happen. You're making things up. You're twisting it. You're crazy and you are the problem, right? And, you know, maybe you even go through a period of limiting contact where, you know, okay, I'm only going to text you once a week instead of every day. I'm only going to see you once a month instead of every week, you know? And I think there's a lot of people that kind of go through that. And you have some parents who just aren't willing to respect your boundaries, right? And so there's just these two different types of parents out there, you know, some that do listen to their adult children, who do care about how they make them feel, who do respect their boundaries and, you know, the rules of their adult life, right? And then you have another set of parents that don't. And so, you know, when we're dealing with those kind of parents and we're making boundaries, we're, you know, saying how we feel, our needs, and those things aren't being respected, and we have to make that last ditch effort of, okay, now I'm going no contact. That's the last option on your list. That's not the choice that you have made. That choice has been made for you, I think. I'm like, I didn't make this choice. I would love to have a relationship with my mother. I would love to have a mother that would acknowledge how she makes me feel and the things that she does to me, that would take accountability for her behaviors, that would apologize. My life would be completely different right now if I had a parent that would apologize to me.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I don't feel like that's my choice then. I would love to have a parent that I could call and say, hey, I have a podcast interview in the morning and my husband is traveling. Can you take my kids to preschool? You know, and there's so many people out there that do have those parents. I would love to have that parent. And I don't have that parent. And so, you know, we have to grieve the loss of the experience, the loss of what you could have been, what you should have been, you know, the whole fairy tale land. You know, I think I grieve this made up version of my mom, not the mom that I actually have. I grieve all the things I wish you could be, because I know you could be that person. And there's just limitations to why you can't.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I think grieving the idea of what you know that person could be, because for me, and I don't know if your experience is similar, but my mum, she wasn't an alcoholic. She didn't struggle with any kind of addiction or anything. This was simply emotional abuse and a repetition of behaviors that she had well within her power to say, I'm not going to do that because that's going to cause damage to our relationship. And yet the choice was there on her behalf not to. And I think so often people think that there hasn't been any attempt to lower contact. And I always say, well, I wanted to go lower contact, but at the time my mum was living with us when I asked her to leave. So her choice was, I either stay or that's it, our relationship is done, you're dead to me. She couldn't bear the loss of control over the relationship. And I don't know if you went low contact at any point or if you tried.
No, so my mom does the silent treatment. It's like her form of like punishment, right? So we were in a cycle of the silent treatment, but I have 4 children. My oldest was 9 at the time, and my girls were 2 and 1, and I was pregnant with my 4th, and it was starting to affect my oldest. He was old enough to start realizing what was going on. There was a lot of attempts at conversation about, hey, you're not just hurting me anymore. This is now affecting my child. Like, this has to stop. We can't control how others respond to our boundaries, our communication, you know, we can't control that part. And so there was a lot for, I would say, a year of me trying and like almost begging.
It is. It's begging. And it's really,
and it's just like mind blowing to me, because it's like, it felt very like Battered Woman.
Yes.
You know, where
Yeah.
you're just like begging to like be in this relationship with somebody who's just treating you like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, if you were in any other relationship with somebody, people would be looking at you like, what is the matter with you? Your friends would be shaking you like, no,
Yeah.
leave him. Leave
Yeah,
him.
they'd
This
be
is horrible.
sliding like the
Right?
domestic abuse
Yeah. Like,
hotline numbers
stop
to
doing
you.
this.
No
Right.
one would support it, but when it's a
And
parent,
so, I'm just like, please, 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 please. I'm writing letters and emails and I'm
mm,
texting. And then it got to a point where there was a lot of other stuff that happened. And I'm like, I would know in my heart, I will never go back to that relationship now.
yeah, because
And
that's
it's
what's
sad.
safest for
It's really hard. But I now, like, some of the things that my son was saying, it was finally like the first time kind of being validated how I felt. He was like saying the exact same things that I had felt my whole life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. Like, this does make people feel like
Yeah.
this. The difference is I'm going to be your mother and I'm going
Yeah.
to protect you from things that you shouldn't be going through,
Exactly.
And that didn't happen in my family growing up. So I just know how important that is to have an adult say, no, we're not going to treat children in certain ways. So that was kind of my push into no more. I think that we all arrive there differently. I do think that kind of like segues into a good conversation around forgiveness, because I think that we get a lot of messaging like, oh, but she's your mother, you should just forgive her.
Yeah,
Or
everybody's heard
that,
that one.
or that like maybe you don't even need to be in contact with her, but in your healing journey, you have to find forgiveness for her in order to move on. And I don't believe in that.
No.
I don't think that you need to ever get to a place of forgiveness. I think that the person that you need to forgive is
It's
yourself.
yourself. I knew you were going to say that, and that
It's
resonates
yourself,
so deeply because
you know?
you do hold this over yourself
Yeah.
as a why didn't I do it sooner? And especially with
Sooner
hearing
for
you
me,
say,
for
about
sure.
your eldest, very similar situation with my eldest,
Mm-hmm.
whereby it was only when we cut contact that he started to tell us some genuinely horrendous things she'd tried to
Yeah.
put on him or encourage him to do, or, lying to us, bad mouthing my husband, bad mouthing me, and
Yeah.
all of these things that I remember from my childhood that
Mm-hmm.
I remember. And it's that coming to a place of saying, okay, I maybe didn't do that as soon as I now feel I should have done.
Yeah.
I didn't cut contact with you and be kinder to myself when I should have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had, but I can't
Right.
change that. So I'm going to let that go.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, okay, you didn't, but you have. And that's okay now. But it's so hard to forgive yourself. But equally, there is this real discussion around breakdowns in relationship, and that the only way you can reach true healing and come full circle is to find forgiveness, and that forgiveness is for yourself. And I don't buy it either. It's so funny you're shaking your head.
No,
I just,
I'm like hard shaking my head. Like,
yeah.
no, 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 no. I do think that, in your healing journey, I've like kind of watched myself like evolve, right? Where you're just like, I was living in so much anger in the beginning. I was just like furious, angry, depressed, low, sad, resentful, felt betrayed, abandoned. And I've like kind of watched like the shift in me to where now I don't feel I can easily like slip into some of that anger stuff.
Yes.
But I feel like now I do have a level of compassion for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that comes with healing. I
Mm-hmm.
do have understanding.
Yeah.
And I think, that probably I have like, I can very objectively look at her as like, I can put on like my clinical hat and like my therapist hat, and I can very objectively look at her and be so compassionate and understanding about what she's went through in her life, why she is the way that she is, and why maybe she can't change. And so I do have some compassion around that. And I'm no longer going to be in that relationship, and I'm choosing myself, right? And so I
Yes.
think that and word, you can be both, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can both be understanding and compassionate, and I get you, and I'm saying no more. And you
Absolutely.
don't have to forgive all the things that were done to you, right? And I think that, when we talk to more people, other people who are in some of these similar situations who maybe had more extreme levels of abuse, I think that that's bananas to be like, but you have to forgive her
Yeah.
or whoever, that person is, that's really damaging to me. I think that that puts all the responsibility on the victim, the survivor
Absolutely.
of whatever, form of abuse that you've gone through. And that's not your responsibility.
No, it's
Your
not yours.
responsibility is to heal yourself, right? And you can have all kinds of feelings about that. It is
Yeah.
unfair. I think that those feelings are so valid. Angry that you have to be on this healing journey. You can have all those feelings of this isn't fair, because healing is hard.
Yeah.
Healing is hard, and I don't wish it on you.
It is.
But I'm proud of every person that arrives, says no more, and I'm going to do better for me and my family.
I think people quite often mix up the feelings of compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. In order for you to be compassionate about it, you have to forgive. And as you say, absolutely not. That's not true at all. You can be someone who very much looks back at those behaviors and says, they weren't acceptable. I am letting that go. It is no longer holding over me. It's no longer controlling me. I no longer feel shame around that. I can look at that objectively, but I do not forgive you for that. And I do not need you in my life.
Right.
And that's absolutely acceptable to do. And there is this kind of myth that in order to be truly healed, you need to be forgiving as well. And you don't. And as you quite rightly said, that then puts the responsibility back onto the victim, onto the person who has had that negative treatment, and they're then expected to be the ones to pick up those pieces yet again, because have we not spent our entire lives picking up those pieces and trying to heal this relationship while someone else who should have been the adult in the situation runs riot with it? And that's why I feel so passionate about breaking that cycle with my children, because that in itself is incredibly difficult. We use our parents, I guess, as a blueprint for how we should be.
Yeah.
So when I look at, I no child ever gets the same parent. I look at my eldest and he does not have the same parent that his younger siblings had. And then the middle one doesn't have it. Nobody ever gets the same parent. Like, it just doesn't happen. We're all at different stages. We're at different beings. We are,
like personalities play into that too. Like I have one that's like easier and one that's harder. You're like,
completely. Completely. And we never get the same child. They never get the same parent. We've all got to adapt. But I look back at some of my behavior when he was tiny, and I can see my mum. I can see her behavior, and I look at it and I think, but I knew at the time that I didn't want to parent that way, but I felt that that's how I should parent, even down to things like when he was a baby, we did cry it out, never sat well with us. And we were both so uncomfortable, but we had both older generations, both sides were saying, oh no, that's how it's done. And we were like, but this doesn't feel right. And then by the time our middle one came along, he was so easy. You lay him in the cot and he just looked at you like, bye, and went to sleep. We were like, I don't know what this child is, but let's not do anything with it because it might break it.
Don't look at him.
Don't look at him, walk away. And then by the time my daughter came along, she was like, I'm not going in that. Absolutely not. Don't put me in that cot. And so it was totally polar opposites. We went from being this kind of cry it out, sit downstairs crying ourselves because we were uncomfortable, to co-sleeping and having this constant held. It was totally opposite. And that was part of my breaking the cycle and healing. But then there are other behaviors that I look back at and, where I've shouted at him, and we all shout everybody loses their temper sometimes. But for the smallest things, and my reactions have been reactive instead of proactive, or I've been unnecessarily angry or anxious. And that was all part of me following through the cycle, because that's how I was parented and I didn't want to do that. So how do you break that? How do you look at your own parenting and then move into a different style of parenting? How do you consciously do that?
Yeah. So I think like the first piece is like just having that self-awareness, right? And like, I'm going to raise my hand too. It is so crazy to me how easy my mother comes out of me. And especially with one of my daughters who reminds me so much of me and like little me, and I just like, look, I don't know. It just is so easy for me to show up as my mom.
Yeah.
And it's like wild to me. I spend so much of my own time in my own therapy, just like working on, okay, how am I going to not be like this, especially with her? And you just like, there's so much shame there because you're like, I know how damaging this is and I'm still doing it. I'm still like this. Like, what kind of monster are you? Don't be like that. It's not shameful. It's like kind of like what you were saying about the blueprint. I loved that, that this is what you've been taught. And so now showing up and being a different mother when it is something that you have never seen, of course, that doesn't come natural, of course. So first, like kind of coming with that self-compassion for yourself, like, okay, I'm a messy human. I'm learning something new. I'm not going to be perfect at this in the beginning. Right.
Yeah.
And having some of that self-awareness of, okay, I know I really lost it today and that's how my mom used to do it. I don't want to be like that. Right. So now it's on my radar. I'm going to start making conscious choices that I'm not going to show up like this.
Yeah.
But we are messy humans and you are going to show up like that sometimes still. Even having that self-awareness, even knowing how damaging this is, sometimes you're just going to have your mom come out of you. And I think that the piece that's going to break that cycle and that you're going to do different is you're going to come to your tiny humans and you're going to be like, hey, I'm going to take accountability for my actions.
Yeah.
I'm going to name it. Hey, mom was really shouty with you earlier. I'm really sorry. Nobody should talk to you like that. How did that make you feel? That made you feel scared? I bet that made you feel scared. I'm really sorry. Mom's going to do better next time. Next time, mom's going to go take a time out when I'm feeling frustrated like that. And then you're going to model that next time and they're going to see that like you mean what you say. That doesn't mean that you're never going to be the shouty mom again, because it's probably going to happen again.
Yeah, it will. I mean, they're really frustrating.
And so I think that there's so much beauty in modeling these messy moments with our humans, with our little people, that, you take accountability when you mess up. You own it. You apologize, right? I know I've already said my life would be completely different if I had an adult that would apologize to me, or that would have when I was a kid, right? Would have right now. And so, I think it's so important that we model that, because we expect them to do that when they go out into the world, when they go up to school and they get in a little tussle over a toy.
Yeah.
I expect them to go back and say, hey, sorry, I was fighting with you over that toy. Wasn't cool. Here you go. Right.
Yeah.
I expect them to do that. So why am I expecting them to do something that I'm not modeling? I think that that's bananas. And I think that we came from a lot of that. Yeah. We came from kind of a generation of just do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
And now as adults, you have some of these, I think that we have a lot of this going on, where you have these adult children saying no more to their parents, and you have these parents like, oh my gosh, you're so ungrateful, you're the problem, whatever, and it's like, what, you've been preaching this whole time that, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And now finally, when we've arrived and we're saying no more to you, it's the problem. So I think the cycle is going to be broken when it's not that we have to show up and be the perfect mother. It's that you show up and you be a mother that's accountable for her behaviors, acknowledges what's going on, and apologizes and has that repair with their children. It's going to build trust in your relationship with your children. It's going to build great modeling for them, and it's going to build that connection. There's so much connection that is in that repair. Have compassion for yourself. You don't have to show up and be this perfect mom that never shouts. I think that breeds like, now I have to be perfect.
Yeah. That brings out the kind of, when you feel like you have to be perfect, that takes you even further into a toxic cycle, doesn't it? Because then there's that self-hatred every time you do mess up, because you will. We all do. I say this so often that we all make mistakes. Nobody has ever asked for perfection. And I read somewhere that I think parents only have to get it right, as it were, something like 30 to 40% of the time, in order for us to build strong bonds. And it's like, well, what the hell was my mum doing?
Pressure off.
I mean, come on, my guy, 30%, that's literally all we were asking, 30% of the time. And if we can be accountable and we can put effort into that repair, and we can put effort into those moments. And again, as an adult, I look at adult relationships, and when people will message me and say, okay, this was the situation and it was so hard, and all I really wanted was for her to come to me and say, or him to come to me and say, I'm really sorry I made you feel that way. I appreciate that actually the way I'm behaving here is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to work on myself and on doing better with that, because I've messed up here.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And then following through on actually making those changes, because we've all been in those relationships, even if you haven't had a toxic parent and you've had a toxic relationship where somebody says they're going to show up, somebody says that they're going to do the work, and then nothing changes.
Right.
And that's where the damage sits, is when nothing changes, when you don't follow through with what you've said, and then when you can't apologize when you do make those mistakes, because we're all humans, we're all going to make mistakes, but actually being accountable is what so many of us missed out on. It makes a big difference, doesn't it, just to hear those words. And I think people, I don't know what it is with the older generations and holding back on that. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry, really. I mean, it both is a massive deal and really not a big deal at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
It doesn't seem that hard.
It does. Like, you know you were bad. You know you did wrong.
I know.
Just say sorry. And again, like you said, we've always been taught to do that. And I think one of the things that we do model to our children when we cut ties with toxic people is we will forever tell our children, don't allow somebody to treat you that way. Don't allow somebody to be unkind to you. You know, if they've got someone who's picking on them at school, okay, well, stay away from them. Let's stay away. Just if they pick on you, you sort of, and I'm saying this to my nearly 12-year-old all the time.
Right.
Okay, right. You've fallen out with so-and-so. Don't sit with him then. Like,
right.
That's just stay away from them. And yet most people would say that. Most people would say, tell a teacher and then stay away. Don't react, just stay away. And yet when you apply that to a family relationship, it's like, oh, well, you can't just
family over everything.
Dare you? Exactly. Family
over everything, over your mental health, your well-being, your safety. Who cares?
Exactly. Just, I mean, don't stay away. It is
crazy. Yeah, we don't subscribe to that. So.
No. And I think we can break the cycle as well when we model to our children that bad behavior is not tolerated just because of a familial bond.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think, if I am not being healthy for my children, I hope that you are able to walk away or have a conversation or whatever. You know what I mean?
I get a lot of people
because we're going to do it all differently.
Because we're going to do it differently. And I get a lot of people will say to me, I do. Yeah. They'll say, oh, well, wait until it's your turn. Your children will do this. And nobody ever really knows what to say when you turn around and say, if that happens, I'll be accountable for it. And I will ask myself, how can I work on myself? Yeah. How can I do things differently to ensure that I can build that relationship back up? Right. And then it's like, oh, right.
I spent like months like crying myself to sleep in the beginning. Just like really, really bad in my bed. And I would just look at my husband and just like, what would our children have to do for me to treat them like this? Like how I'm being treated right now. What would any of them have to do for me to give them the silent treatment, to cut them off the way that my mother does? And I couldn't think of a single thing. And like you go through, like play out like the worst scenarios that like your children could do, the worst of the worst, right? Go there, like be so extreme. Would you cut your child off? I don't think so. And I think like, you can kind of think about like addiction stuff. And, I know that there's a lot of parents that go through like really hard things with kids. And I'm sure that there's places where you have to put in firm, loving boundaries, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's a single thing that I would be how my mother was being with me.
No.
There's not a single thing that I could play out in my mind that I would show up and be like that. No. I'm like, I'm not any of those like crazy extreme things that like you're thinking up in your head right now. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's so wild to me that like these little things would happen. And that's like what would set these silent treatment cycles off. And it would be like, no, now I'm not going to talk to you for months. Yeah. And you're like, over this?
It's bizarre because you might hold your child accountable. You might hold your child accountable, say they did something illegal. You would hold them accountable 100%. But there's a difference between holding them accountable and like, explaining to them.
Like that's abusive.
Yeah, it is.
The silent treatment is a form of abuse.
It 100% is. The damage that the silent treatment did to me as a child, to the point now where even after like a normal disagreement with my husband, if he goes quiet, I'm like,
are you still there? Are you good?
What is happening?
You still love me?
Like 15 years later, through the worst ups and downs that we could possibly be through, the silent treatment is the one way to send me into a panic. And that comes from my mother's silent treatment. We see silent treatment joked about quite a lot on social media of like, oh, she's not talking to him and she's just saying fine. But actually in any relationship setting, but especially a parent to a child, it's so damaging and it's so painful. Do not sulk with your children ever, because it does nothing. And my mum used to say to me, I don't sulk. But what I would get is I'd get silent treatment for days and days on end if I really upset her. But then I would get this explosive rage, and then she'd walk into the kitchen and walk back out the kitchen and talk to me as if nothing had happened. And it was so topsy-turvy. So it would either be complete silent treatment or an explosion followed by complete pretend that nothing had happened. And you could just never regulate or I couldn't regulate as a child what version was going to show up on that day, or whether I was going to have complete silent treatment because I'd done something. And like you say, really small things that you're like, over this?
Yeah. Like what? Like one time it was like I went camping and she didn't think I should go camping. And she didn't talk to me for 3 months. I'm like,
wow.
Yeah. You know, like the examples that I could give, people would just be like, huh?
Yeah.
Wait, so your relationship ended because of that?
Yeah. Camping.
And like, so it just sounds like so nuts.
It is nuts. And that's
what
nuts. Hurts.
And like
so
you
much.
Just can't live like that. Like
never knowing which version of them you're going to get on that day. Never knowing
live like that.
No, nobody can live like that. But that is very
I'm a mom
common,
of 4. Like I'm too spread thin to be like managing that. Like this is enough. This like family that I've created. That's enough.
Yeah, the family that you create is often enough. And it's often a balm to the family that you were born into. And you do have that power to create that family that soothes the wounds that you have, that allows you to feel safe and comfortable to be the person that you know you can be. And you can create that, and you can create that with your children. You can create that foundation for your children, even if you've not had it. And I think that's what we're doing. Oh, Abbey, thank you so much. This has been such a fab chat, honestly.
I know, I really enjoyed it. Brilliant. You, Harriet. Thank you for inviting me.
No, absolutely. Can you let people know where they can find you and your wonderful content so that they can follow along?
Yeah, so you can listen to You the Mother podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast. And then I'm the most active over on Instagram at You the Mother. I'm also on TikTok and Facebook at You the Mother as well. I do one-on-one coaching and support groups on this topic. You can find those over on my website, youthemother.com. The estrangement project that I'm a part of is the estrangementproject.com. And that has been beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So please make sure that you go follow along with that as well. I think that's it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And I will pop all the links and things in the description. So if anybody wants to find that there, then you can absolutely do so. Thank you so much, Abbey.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.